Few cases in modern European legal history have sparked as much raw, unresolved moral debate as the story of Marion Bachmeier, a young German mother whose life was defined by heartbreak long before it became defined by a single, irreversible act inside a courtroom. To understand what happened on that cold March morning in 1981, you have to go back to the very beginning, to a small town in Lower Saxony, and to a childhood that never really offered this woman a chance at anything resembling peace. Marion Bachmeier was born on June 3, 1950, in the modest town of Sarstedt, located in the West German federal state of Lower Saxony. Her parents had arrived in the region in the chaotic aftermath of World War II, displaced and resettled like so many millions of Germans in the post-war years. Her father, a former SS officer and a member of the National Socialist Party, had managed to avoid the harshest consequences of denazification, but the ideology that had shaped him left its mark on his temperament and his household. He was a domineering, volatile man, and his addiction to alcohol only amplified those qualities. Rather than building a life with his family, he spent the greater part of his evenings at a bar located just steps from their home, leaving his wife and young daughter to navigate the silence and the tension of a house where warmth was rarely offered and affection was almost never expressed. Marion's mother, for her part, was emotionally distant in ways that were perhaps harder to explain, but no less damaging to a young girl growing up in desperate need of connection. The two rarely spent meaningful time together, and Marion's interior world, her dreams, her fears, her quiet moments of childhood wonder, seemed to hold little interest for the woman who was supposed to nurture her. As the years passed and her father's drinking grew worse, so too did the violence that accompanied it. Eventually, Marion's mother made the decision to divorce him, a choice that might reasonably have offered the family some relief. For Marion, it was a moment that held genuine promise, a sense that perhaps life could finally shift toward something lighter. But that hope was short-lived. Her mother quickly remarried, and the man she chose turned out to be cut from the same cloth as the one she had left behind. He was rigid, authoritarian, and harsh in his dealings with the teenage girl who had hoped to finally find some semblance of stability. Marion openly clashed with her stepfather, calling him a dictator, resisting his rules, and pushing back against a domestic environment that felt every bit as suffocating as the one she had been born into. When those conflicts escalated beyond what the household could contain, Marion's mother sided with her new husband, and in one of the most consequential moments of Marion's young life, she was turned out of her own home. She was still a teenager, out on the streets of a West German town with nowhere to go and no one looking out for her. Marion became vulnerable in every sense of the word. She was subjected to a series of deeply troubling incidents involving men who took advantage of her precarious situation. As a result of one such incident, she became pregnant at the age of 16. In 1966, she gave birth to her first child. With no stable housing, no steady income, and no support system of any kind, she made the devastating but pragmatic decision to relinquish the child for adoption, a sacrifice that would haunt her in the years ahead. 2 years later, she became pregnant again, this time by a young man she was seeing at the time. Despite the dysfunction at the heart of that relationship, Marion was determined to keep this child. She wanted to try, but the effort was derailed almost immediately. Shortly after the baby was born, she was targeted in a violent incident involving an unknown man, an experience that left lasting psychological scars and destabilized what little routine she had managed to establish. Her partner, unwilling or unable to step up, abandoned her in the newborn, leaving her alone and without the financial means to provide adequate care. Once again, she found herself making an impossible choice, and the second child was placed in foster care. These years of loss and survival, of being repeatedly failed by the adults and institutions that were supposed to protect her, left Marion profoundly shaped by absence, by the experience of reaching for something and having it taken away. She eventually left school altogether, determined to find work and build some kind of independent life. It was through that search that she encountered a man named Klaus Hold, the manager of a bar where she secured a position. A relationship developed between them, and before long Marion was pregnant for the third time. This time something was different. She had income. She had resolve. She had made a decision, deep and deliberate, that she would not give this child up. Klaus Hold, however, did not share her certainty. He refused to support the pregnancy, and the two parted ways. His departure did nothing to weaken her commitment. On November 14, 1972, Marion gave birth to a daughter. She named her Anna. When Marion's mother learned of the birth, she pressured her daughter to give Anna up just as she had the others. Marion refused. She had already carried too much loss, already signed too many documents that had taken children out of her life. She was done with that. She underwent a surgical procedure to ensure she could not become pregnant again, a decision she later described as entirely rational given everything she had been through. She moved with her infant daughter to the city of Lübeck, and the two of them began their life together. It was not an easy life. Marion worked long hours at a bar, and the nature of that work, late nights, irregular schedules, the noise and chaos of a busy establishment, made it difficult to provide Anna with the kind of structured, attentive parenting that a young child needs. She often had to bring Anna with her, and in the quieter hours between shifts, the girl was frequently left to entertain herself. As Anna grew older, people who knew the family noted that Marion tended to treat her daughter more like a small companion than a child who required supervision and boundaries. She expected a level of independence from Anna that was perhaps beyond what a child that age should reasonably be expected to carry. And yet, by all accounts, Anna was a remarkable little girl. She was sociable and imaginative, curious about the world around her, quick to make friends and explore her environment. She had a natural warmth that drew people to her. She also had, by necessity, a great deal of unsupervised freedom. She wandered the neighborhood, introduced herself to strangers, played with animals she encountered along the way, and generally navigated her small corner of Lübeck with the easy confidence of a child who had learned early that the world was something to be engaged with directly. Marion was aware that her lifestyle did not lend itself to conventional parenting. She knew it. There were moments when she allowed herself to acknowledge the gap between the mother she wanted to be and the mother her circumstances permitted her to be. But she also held on to the knowledge that Anna was happy, that Anna was loved, and that between the two of them there existed a bond that was real and fierce and mutual. That was the world as it stood on the morning of May 5, 1980, a Monday when everything changed. Anna had woken in a difficult mood. She did not want to go to school. Marion, tired from a late shift, was in no state for a prolonged argument, and when Anna announced that she wanted instead to go to the park to play with some friends, her mother, after a brief back and forth, relented. She let the 7-year-old go. She had no way of knowing it would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. When Marion returned home from work that evening, Anna was not there. At first she waited, telling herself that the girl had simply gotten caught up in whatever she had been doing and would walk through the door any moment. But the hours stretched on and no one came. As the night deepened and anxiety sharpened into something closer to dread, Marion left the apartment and began searching the neighborhood herself. She knocked on doors, spoke with people who knew her daughter, asked the parents of Anna's friends if they had any idea where she might be. No one did. Anna was simply gone. Investigators later pieced together what had happened. Anna, drawn as she so often was by her affection for animals, had wandered to the apartment of a man named Klaus Grabowski, a 35-year-old who lived in the area and who Anna apparently knew kept cats. She had visited before. She went in. She never came out alive. Marion, realizing she could not find her daughter alone, went to the police and reported Anna missing. The investigation that followed moved quickly, though not in any way that offered comfort. The very next day, a woman appeared at the police station, visibly distressed, and told officers that she needed to report something about her fiancé. She said that the man she was engaged to had confessed to her that he had killed a young girl, a little girl who sometimes came to their apartment to play with the cats. He had told her the child's name was Anna. The officers listening to her account recognized immediately that the pieces were fitting together in a way that was deeply alarming. The woman's fiancé was Klaus Grabowski. His name was already known to law enforcement. Several years earlier, Grabowski had been convicted of committing serious offenses against 2 young girls. While in custody, he had undergone psychological evaluation, and the findings had been troubling. Experts concluded that he was driven by a compulsive attraction to children, an impulse he was assessed as being largely incapable of controlling. Rather than sending him to prison, authorities had directed him to a psychiatric treatment facility. After some time had passed, officials offered him early release in exchange for undergoing a procedure known as chemical castration, the administration of hormonal injections designed to suppress sexual drive and reduce the likelihood of reoffending. Grabowski accepted the offer without hesitation. The procedure itself was described at the time as medically straightforward, a series of injections targeting the hormonal pathways associated with arousal and desire. The intention was that once those impulses were chemically suppressed, the risk of future offenses would be eliminated or at least dramatically reduced. Modern experts have since cast serious doubt on this logic. They point out that chemical castration may reduce certain biological drives, but it does not erase the patterns of thought, the fantasies, or the psychological orientation that underlie compulsive harmful behavior. In Grabowski's case, the intervention proved to be entirely ineffective. After his release, he quietly resumed taking testosterone supplements, reportedly because he disliked the physical and emotional effects the hormonal suppression was producing. By the time Anna Bachmeier crossed his threshold on May 5, 1980, whatever temporary modification the procedure had achieved was gone. According to the account his fiancé brought to police, Grabowski had admitted that he killed Anna in order to prevent her from going to the police or telling someone what had happened to her. In a moment of catastrophic and criminal violence, he took her life and disposed of her remains in a cardboard box, which he left at the edge of a nearby canal. Investigators found the box the following day and confirmed that the remains inside belonged to a young girl. Anna Bachmeier was 7 years old. When officers arrived at Marian's door to tell her what had been found, the weight of that news came crashing down on a woman who had already survived more loss than most people ever face. She had built her entire life around this child, had made her the reason to keep going, had sacrificed and struggled and endured so that Anna could have the love and presence that Marian herself had never been given. And now Anna was gone, taken in the most brutal and senseless way imaginable, by a man who had already demonstrated what he was capable of, a man the system had chosen to release. Grabowski was arrested and charged with the killing of Anna Bachmeier. As the legal process moved forward and a trial date was set, Marian found herself confronting a new and different kind of anguish. She was required to sit in the courtroom, day after day, and listen to testimony. Some of that testimony came from witnesses who described her parenting in the harshest possible terms. They said Anna was essentially unsupervised, that she roamed the streets alone, that her mother's working hours left the child without adequate care or oversight, that something like this had only been a matter of time. Those words landed like blows. Marian absorbed them, devastated and furious, aware that whatever her shortcomings as a mother, no version of events absolved the man who had ended her daughter's life of responsibility for what he had done. But what truly shook her to her core was watching Grabowski himself take the stand and begin to construct a defense that she found not only dishonest but morally obscene. He claimed in the courtroom, before the judge and the cameras and the reporters and the world, that Anna had seduced him. He said the 7-year-old had manipulated him, had threatened to expose him unless he gave her money, that her behavior had left him feeling cornered and afraid, and that what he had done was in some twisted sense a response to pressure she had applied. He was describing a 7-year-old child as a calculating aggressor. He was doing it under oath. He was doing it to stay out of prison. The courtroom reaction was one of visible disgust, but the legal machinery ground on regardless, because the psychiatric assessments that had followed Grabowski's arrest suggested that his mental health history was complex enough that he might, under the law, be found to have diminished criminal responsibility. That possibility, that he could once again be rooted away from prison and into treatment, that he could be let out into the world again, was something Marian found herself unable to accept. She began to form a plan. In the weeks and months leading up to the trial, while publicly presenting herself as a grieving mother navigating an unbearable legal process, Marian was doing something else entirely in private. She obtained a firearm, a semi-automatic pistol manufactured by the Italian company Beretta. She found a place to practice shooting, and she went regularly, developing her accuracy in secret, telling no one in her life what she was preparing to do. She was methodical. She was patient. She was waiting for a moment she had already decided would come. That moment arrived on March 6, 1981. The trial of Klaus Grabowski was underway at the district court in Lübeck. Shortly before 10 o'clock in the morning, Marian Bachmeier entered the courtroom, approximately 10 minutes after proceedings had resumed. She was dressed in a pale coat. Her face was composed and largely expressionless. Her hands were inside her pockets. She made her way through the room with quiet deliberateness and came to a stop a few meters behind where Grabowski was seated, positioning herself directly behind him while he faced the judge and delivered his testimony. The room was active with the ordinary noise of a court in session. No one had noticed her. No one had stopped her. Exactly how she had managed to bring a loaded firearm through the security measures in place at the courthouse, which were considered strict by the standards of the day, has never been fully explained. Then, in the space of a few seconds, she drew the pistol from her coat pocket and fired. She pulled the trigger 8 times in rapid succession. 7 of the 8 rounds struck Klaus Grabowski. He collapsed immediately. The 8th round failed to discharge, jammed inside the barrel. In the stunned and chaotic seconds that followed, some people in the courtroom would later describe a peculiar observation, that only 7 bullets had found their mark, 1 for each year of Anna's life. Whether that symmetry was intentional or coincidental, no one but Marian could say. She did not attempt to flee. She made no effort to resist when court officers moved to detain her. Her expression, according to multiple witnesses, remained essentially unchanged from the moment she had entered the room. Emergency personnel reached Grabowski within minutes, but there was nothing to be done. He was pronounced dead at the scene. When the confirmation was delivered, observers in the courtroom said they watched a visible change move across Marian's face, not triumph, not relief in any ordinary sense, but something more like the exhausted release of a weight she had been carrying for 10 months. She was taken into custody. In the hours and days that followed, the story of what had happened in that Lübeck courtroom spread across West Germany and beyond at a speed that reflected just how raw the nerve it had struck. By the next morning, newspapers across the country had published photographs of Marion Bachmeier and were calling her the Revenge Mother. Television crews from across Europe descended on Lübeck to cover the story. It was discussed in homes, in offices, in government buildings, in academic institutions, and on radio broadcasts in multiple languages. People had opinions, strong ones, and they cut in every direction. Marion herself, in the period immediately following her arrest, was described by those who interacted with her as appearing to exist in a kind of dissociative state, as though the full reality of what she had done and what had been done to her had not yet fully integrated into her conscious experience. A forensic psychiatrist was assigned to assess her mental state. During one session, he handed her a piece of paper and a pen and asked her to write something down, without telling her what he was looking for or why. Marion picked up the pen and wrote 7 words in German. "I did it for you, Anna." Beside those words, she drew 7 small hearts, one for each year of her daughter's short life, or one for each bullet, depending on how you chose to read it. The legal proceedings against Marion Bachmeier were lengthy and scrutinized at every stage. When she took the stand, she told the court that she had not been fully conscious of what she was doing, that she had experienced the moment as something close to a waking dream, and that she had even seen Anna walking past her in the courtroom before she acted. She also made statements that worked against her in the eyes of the judge, most notably the claim that she had originally acquired the weapon with the intention of harming only herself. Given the documented months of target practice and the obvious premeditation that the circumstances implied, the court did not find that account credible, and neither did most people observing the trial. Yet public opinion, particularly among ordinary citizens, leaned heavily in her favor. Letters arrived at the prison from across West Germany and from other countries as well, letters containing flowers, sweets, and words of solidarity. People who had watched the case unfold, who had heard Grabowski's defense, who understood the failures that had allowed him to be released in the first place, felt that what Marion had done was not merely understandable, but perhaps necessary. Others, a smaller but vocal group, condemned her. They argued that no individual had the right to determine guilt and carry out punishment outside the framework of law, regardless of the provocation. They pointed to her record as a mother, to the 2 children she had relinquished for adoption, to the degree of freedom Anna had been permitted to roam unsupervised, and they drew conclusions from those facts that were deeply unflattering. The debate reached into the broader critique of the West German judicial system itself. Critics asked pointed questions about how a man with Grabowski's documented history had been deemed suitable for early release, how a procedure as contested and imperfect as chemical castration had been accepted as a sufficient safeguard, and what responsibility the state bore for the death of a child it had, in some meaningful sense, failed to protect. In March 1983, after months of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Marion Bachmeier was found guilty of manslaughter, specifically the charge used under German law when a killing is deemed to have occurred without full premeditation or in a state of severe emotional disturbance, and she was also convicted of the unlawful possession of an unregistered firearm. The combined sentence handed down by the court was 6 years in prison. While she served her sentence, the flow of public support did not stop. Packages and letters continued to arrive. Petitions were circulated on her behalf. Legal observers and advocacy groups debated whether the sentence was appropriate, too lenient, or in some interpretations, too harsh given the circumstances that had produced it. After serving part of her sentence, authorities ultimately concluded that the remainder of her time did not need to be completed, and she was released early. The world she re-entered was one that had changed around her, and she had changed within it. Shortly after her release, Marion negotiated the exclusive rights to her life story and sold them to a major German news publication for 100,000 Deutschmarks, a sum she said she needed entirely to pay off the legal debts that had accumulated over the course of 2 trials spanning nearly 3 years. Some years later, she married a teacher and relocated to Accra, the capital of Ghana, where she lived for a period before the marriage dissolved. After the divorce, she traveled to Sicily, the Italian island off the southern coast of the country, where she found work at a hospice caring for people in the final stages of terminal illness. There was something quietly profound about that choice, the woman who had carried so much death choosing to spend her time holding space for those who were dying. She remained in Sicily for several years, finding in that role a kind of purpose that the fractured, restless years of her earlier life had never offered her. Eventually, a diagnosis changed everything. Doctors discovered that Marion had developed pancreatic cancer, an aggressive and unforgiving disease that left her little time and no easy options. It brought her back to Germany, back to Lübeck, the city where her daughter had been taken from her and where she had taken her own form of reckoning. Understanding in her final months that the end was near, she made an unusual and deeply personal request. She asked an acquaintance to accompany her everywhere with a video camera, to document the final chapter of her life as it unfolded, in her own words and on her own terms. Marion Bachmeier died on September 17, 1996, in a hospital in Lübeck. She was 46 years old. She was buried in the same cemetery where Anna had been laid to rest years before, and her grave was placed beside her daughter's. After everything that had separated them, after all the years and the loss and the impossible choices and the violence and the trials and the wandering, they were finally together again. The story of Marion Bachmeier is not a simple one and has never been easy to categorize. It sits at the intersection of systemic failure and personal tragedy, of a mother's grief and a flawed justice system, of public vengeance and private devastation. It raises questions that courts and philosophers and ordinary people have never been able to fully resolve, questions about what justice truly looks like when the law seems incapable of delivering it, about what a parent will do when everything else has failed, and about what it means to live and die for the one person who made your life worth living.